When you hear the name Iran, it likely conjures images of headlines filled with conflict, threats, secret alliances, and nuclear ambitions. But what many overlook is that Iran's story is far older and far more prophetic than most realize. Did you know Iran's destiny has been written in the Bible since the very beginning? It's true. The scriptures reveal not only the origins of Iran but also its ultimate fate. However, Iran doesn't appear in the Bible under its modern name. It's known by its ancient name, Persia. The Bible's account of Persia isn't just a history lesson, it's a prophetic timeline that stretches from ancient days to the end times. Persia's future is intertwined with one of the most chilling prophecies in the book of Revelation, the war of Gog and Magog, a coalition that will rise against Israel in the last days. But before Persia became part of an end-time prophecy, it held a very different role in God's plan. Persia was once an instrument of divine purpose, chosen and used by God to liberate His people, rebuild His temple, and fulfill the prophecies spoken by Daniel. Isn't that astonishing? So what does this mean for us today? What hidden truths lie within Iran's story, truths that directly connect to God's unfolding plan for humanity? Stay with me until the end, because what you are about to uncover is a reality few have dared to speak about. Iran's destiny, from Genesis to Revelation, is more than a political headline. It's a divine story that continues to unfold before our very eyes. If you're ready to dive deeper, comment 777 and join me on this incredible journey. Let's uncover the hidden role of Iran in God's master plan, a revelation you won't want to miss. The origins of Iran, written in Genesis. Our story begins at the dawn of a new world after the great flood in the days of Noah. As the waters receded and humanity was given a second chance, the future of nations was placed into the hands of Noah's 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. These weren't just survivors. They were the fathers of nations, men whose bloodlines would shape the map of the world. Genesis chapter 10 isn't merely a list of names. It is the Bible's first world atlas, a divine genealogy outlining how regions, peoples, and empires came to be. Genesis 10:1 declares, "This is the account of the families of Shem, Ham, and Japheth, the sons of Noah, from whom all the people of the earth descended." Among those names are 2 critical figures whose descendants would eventually form what we know today as Persia, modern-day Iran, a nation destined for both greatness and prophecy. The first is Madai, son of Japheth. His descendants became the Medes, mountain warriors who settled in the rugged highlands of northern Iran. Isolated among snow-capped peaks and deep valleys, the Medes grew into strong, independent clans known for their resilience, fierce loyalty, and military prowess. These were not city builders but highland defenders, a people toughened by the harshness of the land. Madai is remembered as the forefather of Iran's northern territories. The second is Elam, son of Shem. His descendants, the Elamites, settled in the lush, fertile plains of southwestern Iran near the Persian Gulf. Unlike the Medes, the Elamites developed sophisticated urban centers and controlled vital trade routes. Their influence spread rapidly due to their strategic location and wealth. While they thrived economically and politically, they were also frequent aggressors against neighboring peoples, including the early descendants of Abraham. In fact, Genesis 14 records the first major international war in the Bible, a dramatic conflict that included the Elamites. This wasn't just a local skirmish, but a battle that tested alliances and revealed the growing power of ancient kingdoms.
When heaven's chosen ones are threatened, the response is never passive. It is fierce, it is decisive, and it shakes the earth. In this moment, 4 powerful eastern kings, led by Chedorlaomer, king of Elam, forged an unholy alliance. With ruthless determination, they swept westward into the land of Canaan. Cities fell, populations were enslaved, and among the captives was someone precious, Lot, the nephew of Abraham, the friend of God. Do you understand the weight of this? This wasn't just a military campaign. This was the first recorded confrontation where the ancient bloodlines of Shem and Japheth, forefathers of Iran and surrounding nations, dared to directly oppose God's covenant family. Elam, bolstered by its eastern allies, invaded the very soil where Abraham, God's chosen vessel, walked, lived, and carried the promise of nations yet unborn. But what did Abraham do when the covenant was challenged? Did he tremble? Did he retreat? Did he attempt to negotiate peace? Number. This was the moment that would define his faith for generations to come. With nothing but 318 trained servants from his own household, Abraham mounted a daring midnight assault. Outnumbered, outgunned, outmatched. Yet without hesitation, he struck. His men shattered the combined forces of the eastern kings. The covenant man prevailed. Lot was rescued. The captives were freed, and the spoils of war were recovered. But how? How could one man and his small band overcome entire Eastern armies? The answer wasn't strategy. It wasn't military genius. It was covenant favor, divine backing. Heaven itself stood behind Abraham. This was no ordinary battle. This was a declaration written in blood and fire that no empire, no king, no alliance can prosper against the one whom God has blessed. This was heaven's voice thundering through history. What I ordain, I defend. It wasn't just a victory on a battlefield. It was a statement to every generation after, a warning written into the fabric of time. Touch not my anointed, do my prophets no harm. And yet, the story doesn't end there. The people of Elam weren't wiped from existence. They didn't disappear into the sands of history. Their cities may have fallen that day, but their bloodline endured. Their legacy flowed quietly through the veins of Mesopotamia. While empires like Egypt and Babylon dominated the headlines of history, the children of Elam grew often overlooked, but never gone. Their descendants dwelled in the lush southern plains where the rivers fed prosperity and life. To the north, the Medjarden by mountains and storms were molded into warriors as tough as the stone that surrounded them. Two peoples, two spirits, one destiny. While the world obsessed over larger empires, something was stirring in the shadows. From nomadic clans to tribal confederations, from confederations to kingdoms, and finally to Empire, Persia. But don't be deceived by their idols, their altars, or their foreign gods. Though they bowed to carved images, they were never beyond the reach of God. His eyes never left them. His plan had already woven their names into the tapestry of redemption. Long before they knew him, he had already spoken about them. Through the mouths of prophets like Isaiah and Jeremiah, God declared stunning, world-shaking prophecies over Elam and Media words that would be fulfilled with frightening accuracy, echoing like thunder through the corridors of time. What if what we are witnessing today, the tension, the conflict between Israel and Iran, is not simply geopolitical struggle, but the stirring of an ancient spiritual war? What if these aren't just modern headlines, but the continuation of a story written back in Genesis? The descendants of Elam once marched against Abraham, and though they fell, they rose again. And as prophecy unfolds, the same spiritual battle that ignited thousands of years ago is once more moving toward a final, inevitable confrontation. Because while Elam once marched with swords, Abraham once stood with faith, and the real question still remains, who stands under covenant today? And when the next battle comes,
the first prophecy, spoken through Isaiah and echoed by Jeremiah, declared that Elam and Media would rise not as enemies of Israel but as instruments in God's hand to bring judgment upon Babylon. Babylon, the mighty empire that crushed Jerusalem, destroyed the temple, and dragged God's people into exile, would not escape divine justice. God had already chosen the hand that would bring Babylon's downfall, the united peoples of ancient Iran. Have you ever stopped to consider how God can use those outside the covenant to fulfill His divine purposes? How a nation steeped in idolatry could become the hammer of heaven? Yet, the second prophecy was even more astonishing. God would not stop at judgment. He would use Persia not only to punish Babylon, but to bring freedom and restoration to His people. Long before this came to pass, more than 150 years before the man even drew breath, God called the name of His chosen deliverer through the prophet Isaiah, a king, a foreigner, a man who did not yet know God, but whom God knew intimately. Isaiah 45:1 records the words, "This is what the Lord says to His anointed, to Cyrus, whose right hand I take hold of to subdue nations before him." Anointed, a word typically reserved for Israel's prophets, priests, and kings, placed upon the head of a pagan ruler. Why? Because Cyrus would become God's agent of liberation. He would issue the decree allowing the Jewish exiles to return home. He would fund the rebuilding of the temple in Jerusalem, and in doing so, he would be written into the sacred story of a people not his own. But before Cyrus could rise, God began laying the foundation centuries earlier. In the 8th century BC, a man named Deioces, king of the Medes, began uniting the scattered tribes of Elam and Media. From their alliance, the first Iranian imperial capital, Ecbatana, was born, a name lost to most of history, but engraved in prophecy. This was no mere political maneuver. It was the hidden unfolding of something holy. His grandson, Cyaxares, expanded this foundation, transforming the tribal forces into a powerful military machine. So powerful, in fact, that it conquered Nineveh, the feared capital of the Assyrian Empire, the same empire notorious for its brutal oppression of Israel. With Nineveh's fall, one of Israel's greatest tormentors collapsed beneath the weight of prophecy. Can you see it? Step by step, prophecy was marching forward. God was not a passive observer of history, He was its author. Persia was not a historical accident, it was an instrument of heaven. A people who once fought against God's chosen now became His chosen tool, not for conquest, but for judgment and redemption. Because when God speaks, time listens. And when God appoints 7, a pagan king no power, in heaven or hell, can undo it. If God could call Cyrus by name before his mother conceived him, if He could raise up the forgotten peoples of Elam and Media as the key to Israel's restoration, then how much more is He orchestrating even now? How many nations, rulers, and ordinary lives are quietly being shaped for purposes we cannot yet see? The God who raised Persia from obscurity is still at work, and His story isn't finished. Even as Persia's influence spread across continents, shaping the world stage, its destiny was written long before its kings sat on golden thrones. The first to glimpse it wasn't a general or a king, but a teenage Hebrew captive named Daniel in exile, stripped from his homeland, his temple, and his family, thrust into the heart of the very empire that had shattered his world. It began with tragedy. The Babylonian army, led by King Nebuchadnezzar, stormed Jerusalem. The city walls fell. The temple of the living God was desecrated. Thousands were forced into exile, including young Daniel. Can you imagine that moment? Everything familiar gone, torn from your family, your land, your identity. Yet, in the midst of this devastation, God chose Daniel, not because of rank or power, but because of faithfulness. Surrounded by the temptations of Babylon's wealth, the idolatry, the seductive power, Daniel remained pure. While others feasted at the king's table, Daniel refused. And because of his obedience, God gave him something rare. Visions of the future mysteries revealed not just for his time, but for ages to come. It began with a dream that shook Nebuchadnezzar himself, a towering statue, head of gold, chest and arms of silver, thighs of bronze, legs of iron, feet mixed with iron and clay. The king demanded not only an interpretation but the impossible, that someone tell him the dream itself without being told. No one could until Daniel stood before him. With boldness, Daniel declared, "No man can reveal this mystery, but there is a God in heaven who reveals secrets." Then, with stunning precision, Daniel revealed the dream and its meaning. "You, O king, are the head of gold, Babylon. But after you shall arise another kingdom, inferior to yours, represented by the chest and arms of silver." The silver didn't represent one nation, but two, united as one. The Medes and the Persians, distinct yet inseparable. Eventually, the Persian side would rise stronger, taking the lead in what would become the Medo-Persian Empire. Have you realized? God spoke Persia's rise before it even existed as a world power. While Babylon still seemed invincible, heaven was already preparing its replacement. That statue wasn't just a dream. It was a prophetic timeline, a divine map stretching from Daniel's captivity to the end of the age. Babylon would fall, and the empire of Silver Persia would rise by divine appointment, not mere human ambition. But this was more than history. This was a message for all generations. God raises nations. God brings them down. No power on earth stands outside his will. As Persia's power grew, one name began to emerge from its rugged highlands: Cyrus. Brilliant, bold, and destined, he conquered Media, uniting the thrones. The Medo-Persian Empire was born. Then, Cyrus set his sights on the greatest prize, Babylon. Inside Babylon's glittering halls, King Belshazzar, the arrogant grandson of Nebuchadnezzar, was hosting a drunken feast. In an act of sacrilege, he ordered that the sacred vessels stolen from the temple of God in Jerusalem be brought forth. As they toasted their false gods, mocking the Most High, judgment arrived quiet but terrifying. A hand unseen began to write upon the wall: Mene, Mene, Tekel, Parsin. God has numbered your days. You have been weighed and found wanting. Your kingdom is divided and given to the Medes and Persians. Even as the words dried on the stone, Cyrus's army was already inside the city. In a brilliant move, they had diverted the Euphrates River and marched under Babylon's walls. The inner gates left miraculously unlocked fulfilled Isaiah's prophecy. "I will go before you and level the mountains. I will break down gates of bronze and cut through bars of iron." Isaiah 45:2. Without a single battle cry, Babylon fell. The head of gold was replaced by the chest of silver. Cyrus, king of Persia, now stood at the helm of history. But his greatest act was yet to come. After 70 years in exile, the Jewish people, weeping by the rivers of Babylon, saw the impossible. A foreign king, a pagan king, issued a decree: return home, rebuild your temple, restore your city. Not only did Cyrus release them, he funded the rebuilding of the temple. He empowered them, restored their dignity, and fulfilled the words spoken generations before. Who does that? What kind of king finances the house of a foreign god? Only one, directed by the hand of heaven. Persia became the only empire in biblical history not to destroy Israel but to rebuild it. And yet, even as this miraculous restoration unfolded, God whispered to Daniel another vision, a glimpse of Persia's destiny beyond mercy, because the story wasn't over. Daniel stood by the sea and saw 4 beasts rise from chaotic water siege, more terrifying than the last. But it was the second beast that arrested his gaze, a monstrous bear rising on one side, with 3 ribs clenched in its blood-stained teeth. Then a voice thundered from heaven, "Get up and devour much flesh." The bear was the empire of Media and Persia, and its lopsided stance was no accident. While these 2 powers merged, it was Persia that would rise higher, dominate stronger, and devour more. The 3 ribs? History tells us they were Lydia, Babylon, and Egypt, Persia's greatest conquests. One by one, they fell. Lydia, rich with the cities of Asia Minor, succumbed to Persian ambition. Then Babylon, once the golden head of Daniel's statue, crumbled in a single night. And finally, Egypt, whose pharaoh fell under Persian siege at Pelusium. Persia had become the devourer Daniel foresaw. But Daniel's visions weren't over. Years later, he stood by the Ulai River, and heaven opened again. This time, he saw a ram proud, powerful, with 2 horns, one taller than the other. It charged west, north, and south, unstoppable. The interpretation was clear. The 2-horned ram represents the kings of Media and Persia. Persia once again stood at the heart of God's prophecy. But suddenly, from the west, came a goat swift as wind, not even touching the ground, a single horn between its eyes. It rushed the ram and shattered it completely. This was Greece. Under Alexander the Great, the next empire to rise, Persia would fall just as Daniel had seen. Yet, in its golden age, Persia ruled from India to Ethiopia. It was a world power, and its heart beat from Susa, a city of wealth, law, and royal grandeur. And it was there, not with armies or prophets, but through a young Jewish girl named Esther, that God turned the tide. An orphan, a woman, a nobody in the world's eyes, but divinely positioned for such a time as this. When Queen Vashti defied King Ahasuerus, Esther was chosen from among many, her identity hidden, her destiny ordained. And when the wicked Haman, a descendant of the Amalekitess, sought to exterminate the Jews, Esther stepped into the throne room at the risk of her life. The scepter was raised, favor was granted, and through faith, not force, she saved her people. Persia became, once again, a tool in God's hand. But the story doesn't end in Esther's triumph. Centuries passed. The world changed. And then, in Matthew 2, something extraordinary happens. Magi from the east came to Jerusalem saying, "Where is he who has been born King of the Jews?" These weren't ordinary travelers. They were Persian wise men, magi, from the priestly class, astrologers, scholars, likely spiritual descendants of Daniel's influence in Babylon and Persia. They had read the signs, they had preserved the scrolls, they had followed the prophecy, and now they had followed a star. They crossed deserts, left behind comfort and prestige, all to bow before a baby born in Bethlehem. Their gifts, gold, frankincense, and myrrh, told a story even they may not have fully grasped. A king, a god, a sacrifice. But prophecy doesn't stop in the Gospels. Ezekiel 38 tells us Persia will rise again, but not in worship. In the war of Gog and Magog, Persia modern-day Iran is listed first among a terrifying coalition. This time, not as a redeemer, but a destroyer. Aligned with Russia, Turkey, and North Africa, Persia will march against Israel. But this time, God Himself intervenes. Earthquakes, fire, fury, divine judgment. Persia, the nation that once helped rebuild Jerusalem, will now rise against it. And yet, even here, hope glimmers. In Jeremiah 49-34, -39, God speaks not of Persia directly, but of Elam, an ancient region within modern Iran. He says, "I will break the bow of Elam, but in the last days, I will restore the fortunes of Elam." Judgment comes first, but restoration follows. Could it be that after Persia's end-time rebellion, God will still offer redemption? Could Iran, after all its rage-on day, worship the God of Israel? Isaiah 19:24 hints at this. In that day, Israel will be the third with Egypt and Assyria, and the Lord will say, "Blessed be Egypt, my people, Assyria, the work of my hands, and Israel, my inheritance." If Egypt and Assyria can be included in the end-time blessing, why not Elam? Why not Persia? Final reflection. This is not just about geopolitics, it's prophetic alignment. You and I are living in the scroll. We must stay awake, stand firm, and be on the right side of God's covenant. So ask yourself, will you recognize the star? Will you stand with Israel when the storm comes? Are you ready for such a time as this?